Welcome everybody to this panel on the idea of a Green New Deal for schools. Welcome if you're on Zoom or viewing us on Facebook as well. Really excited for this panel this evening. A quick note, if you have questions for the panel, which we'll get to later on, please put those in the Q&A if you're in Zoom, and I will see those. My name is Daniel Aldana Cohen. I'll be moderating. And if you're on Facebook Live, you can drop questions into the comments, and those will be sent to me as well to pass on to the panel. So really excited to have everybody here. Again, my name is Daniel Aldana Cohen. I'm a sociologist and a Green New Deal fan. And this evening, we're going to be hearing from 4 incredible panelists. Nikil Saval, who's a DSA-endorsed candidate for the Pennsylvania Senate. Jabari Brisport, who's a DSA-endorsed candidate for the New York Senate. Allison, who's a member of the NPC and organizes para-educators. And Jollene Levid, who is an organizer with UTLA Teachers Union. So the panelists will introduce themselves in just a minute. I just want to start off by saying and kind of acknowledging what we're all doing here. We are in the midst of a climate emergency. As everybody knows, the sky is basically on fire throughout the western part of the country. We've had horrifying hurricanes in the southern and eastern shores of the country, catastrophic flooding in the Midwest, and this is not the first time this has happened. This is going on year after year, not just in the United States, but all around the world. At the same time, we're in the midst of this global pandemic, traumatic fights over how, if at all, to reopen schools all across the country in the context of a complete absence of leadership. But that too is not the beginning of the education crisis. There's a much longer running crisis in education in Philadelphia. Where I live, students were wearing masks because of horrible indoor air quality, contamination even from asbestos in schools long before the pandemic. So there's a huge number of issues here that we need to tackle together. And socialists have a ton to bring to the table. So I'm gonna start by asking each panelist to take 3 to 4 minutes to just introduce themselves and they're kind of like what brings them to this issue. And then I'm gonna ask them a set of questions to kind of deepen our analysis, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So very excited, and we'll start with Nikil Saval. Would you introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, DSA, DSA Eco-Socialist. Thank you to my fellow panelists. Really excited to be here and to talk about these issues. So I'm Nikil Saval. I'm the Democratic nominee for State Senate in the 1st Senate District in Philadelphia, which for those of you that know Philadelphia, it covers most of the downtown, Center City, and all of South Philadelphia. It's a big swath of the city. And we won our primary in June. And I am a longtime organizer. I was an organizer with Unite Here, the Union of Hospitality and Hotel Workers. And that was one of the first things that brought me into contact with the conditions in the Philadelphia school system. I was organizing with cafeteria workers and noontime aides, or sort of student safety staff, who were, in 2013, when $1 billion was cut from the state education budget, multiple schools were closed, about 23, if I recall correctly. And an entire job classification, this student safety staff was laid off. So we organized a hunger strike to win back those jobs. And we won after a 2-week hunger strike, which speaks both to the power of organizing, but also to the extraordinary state of how people pay attention to our schools, that we need to actually have people literally starve themselves in the streets in order for people to pay attention to the Philadelphia school system. Since then, we've had sort of a number of different scandals, which Daniel referred to, regarding school conditions and toxicity in our schools. I was, in a sense, provoked to run for state senator, really goaded to do it, when I realized that $2 million had been given in state grant money to remediate a city building for lead and asbestos, for building a luxury hotel, city-owned building, when we had schools closing across Philadelphia for those same reasons, for apparently a lack of money to remediate those things. So we developed a campaign that was based on not just remediating toxicity in our schools, but retrofitting them and essentially establishing a Green New Deal for schools, which would bring more money into our school district. And we'll talk about that later, but we ran on it, we won on it, and I'm very excited to be discussing that platform and all of our collective struggles in our school districts tonight.
Thank you. And next we'll go to Jollene.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me, DSA, Thea, Daniel, DSA Eco Socialist. My name is Jollene Levid. I'm the founding chairperson of Affirm, which is an anti-imperialist transnational feminist organization of women of color. And also, I've been a union organizer for the last 17 years, mostly in healthcare, but for the last 5 years, I've been with United Teachers Los Angeles. For the last 5 years, United Teachers Los Angeles has been getting and staying strike ready, which is why I've been invited to this panel. We have 34,000 educators, and leading up to 2019 January, we did a series of 15 structure tests across our union. And when it came time to strike in January of 2019, we struck all 933 school sites, 100% shutdown of our 34,000 members. I'm on here today with you all because our United Teachers Los Angeles demands went beyond what people in the labor movement call bread and butter issues. So we did protect our healthcare, we did protect our retirement, we did win a raise, but more than that, we struck for smaller class sizes, for more nurses, counselors, librarians. We struck to end the expansion of private charter schools in LA, to end the so-called random searches by school police, racist random searches. We won community schools, and we won green space in our schools. We wanted gardens. We wanted to tear down dangerous bungalows. We wanted our schools to be open on the weekends so that our children have a place to congregate and play. Today, we organize to make sure that those demands are met. But we also have additionally what we call common good demands as part of our union platform today. We want healthcare for all, housing for all, we want sick time for all workers, we want police-free schools, and we're currently organizing to pass something called Proposition 15, Schools and Communities First, which would essentially tax corporations and millionaires. I'm living in the 5th largest economy in the whole world, California, but somehow they can't find enough money for our schools. So we want to tax the millionaires. We want those billions of dollars, those $8 to $12 billion to go back to our schools. As many of you also know, UTLA, we were one of the first unions to endorse Bernie Sanders formally. So I've been on the ground with many of your comrades. And then again, this just past June, we signaled to the district that we were willing to strike again if they were going to try to open our schools physically. So it is an honor to be here with the panelists and with DSA, and we're going to keep fighting alongside you all until we win a Green New Deal and real funded anti-racist public education.
Yes, thank you. Next we'll go to Hannah.
Oh my gosh, thank you. My name is Hannah Allison. I'm excited to follow you, Jollene, because UTLA's organizing and your organizing has been such an inspiration to us here in Kansas. So as I said, my name is Hannah Allison. My pronouns are she and her. I'm on DSA's National Political Committee, and I live in Lawrence, Kansas. And just for folks who don't know, DSA's National Political Committee is our elected 18-person national leadership body that includes our student section YDSA, 2 representatives from YDSA, and we're the body of people that guides the organization politically and organizing wise between conventions of our membership every 2 years. So we carry out the decisions made democratically by our members at convention as the national leadership, as the National Political Committee. And I think I'm also here on this panel because of my paid work in public education, which is also my heart work. So amazed and just happy that, like, even in this really difficult moment, as hard as it has been, we have continued as educators, as families, caregivers, young people to fight for, as Jollene lifted up, anti-racist, healthy, safe schools. So really grateful to get to do that work in the world. So I work specifically as a paraeducator, which here in Kansas in our district, like most school districts across the country, means that I'm an hourly staff person and I work directly to support students with disabilities. And then I am also the chair of our newly recognized paraeducator union. We are affiliated with Communication Workers of America, yay. We think that we're the largest public sector unionization effort in Kansas in the last 10 years. So really exciting. After a 4-year-long campaign, won our union recognition just weeks ago, and the school board is like still crossing the T's and dotting the I's on that. So really excited about that. And then we are also currently organizing other classified staff into our union. So custodians, food service workers, all the other hourly workers in our district, so that we can continue fighting on these issues around reopening that have become so crucial to our survival. And I'll just say a little bit more about the context we're organizing in, similar to what Jollene lifted up about common good demands and about the way in which our community work is connected to our organizing in the public school system. So this summer, a coalition here in Lawrence came together of students, parents, teachers, and teachers are members of the NEA, the teachers union, but came together with our union to do organizing that really emerged alongside the uprising that was happening around the country for Black lives. So there was a white supremacist sign placed in downtown Lawrence, and 3 Black women organized a community effort, an occupation of our downtown, our small town here in Kansas, that then led to the emergence of a continued campaign around the Black Lives Matter at Schools demands here in our public schools. So that it was all happening, right, as we're also organizing around demands around safety in our schools, that we are organizing both for our immediate survival as workers, as paras, and for the demands, right, that are also connected to our students and to our own children and our public schools. So I'm really excited to be on this panel, because I think as we're thinking about the Green New Deal for public education, we're also thinking about what does it mean holistically to organize to transform our communities in all these different ways, and to bring a broad coalition of people together to do that. So I'm really excited to be on this panel with y'all tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And a reminder to everyone, if you do have questions, to send them specifically into the Q&A bubble at the bottom. Otherwise, my brain will explode from a multiplicity of incoming channels. I'm going to turn it over now to Jabari.
So, hey everybody, really excited to be on this panel. My name is Jabari Brisport, he, him. I'm in New York City. I'm just won the Democratic primary for a state Senate seat here, and it's Brooklyn, or this part of Brooklyn, so I'm the presumptive state senator. There's nobody else running in the election. So go DSA and go socialist movement. I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank DSA, the Eco Socialist Group, for putting this together. I can't stress how important it is to talk about the Green New Deal. Like, as you heard, Daniel say earlier, the sky is like the wrong color in the Pacific Northwest, and people still support capitalism for some reason. So I don't know how that works, but it really is important that we're talking about this. Climate is it's an existential issue. I say this not just as an organizer, who's been doing, climate stuff for years now, but also I'm a public school teacher, and I'm actually teaching for the next few months before I take office. But, I have children who suffer from asthma and need clean air. I have children who live in transit deserts and need to be able to get around in a fair way. But most importantly, like I teach children, they're children. And by the time they're my age, it'll be 2040. And I don't want them to, enter their adulthood in a world where coastal cities are, becoming submerged underwater, or where we have hundreds of millions of climate migrants, shifting because they can't have access to decent water, or a world where they're, on turning on the news and hearing that there are water wars or, food starvation wars. That is something very scary and not the world that they should be entitled to or that they should live in. And it's really, really important that we do right by them as the upcoming generation. I can't imagine being in politics and not being very concerned with how the next generation will go on this planet. So this is really important to me. I'm really happy we're organizing this. This is an awesome panel assembled. I feel like the Power Rangers almost assembled from different parts of the United States to come together for the cause. But yeah, I'm excited to be on this panel. I'm excited for the questions, and let's get to it.
Yes, thank you. Wow, love a Power Rangers reference. Captain Planet is old. Power Rangers, bring them back. So as you can all see, this is an extraordinary panel. We have educators, unionists, community organizers, incumbents, slaying movement politicians, and of course, all of us socialists. So the way this conversation will go, I will first ask the panelists about the biggest problems facing schools in their area. What is the immediate, urgent crisis that we're facing? Then we're going to talk about how a massive round of public investment, including green investment, can help to tackle those problems. And then finally, we're going to talk about the challenges and opportunities around organizing for green investment for schools, for a Green New Deal for schools. We want to know what the problems are that we need to solve short term. Then we need to build up our analysis of what role public investment can play. And then we really need to talk about some of the organizing nuts and bolts. How do we make progress in getting to this vision? So this first round of questions, what are the biggest problems facing schools in your area? And Jollene is gonna kick us off with the problems that she's facing or her district is facing, and then we'll move through and hear from the other panelists.
Hi everyone, so many problems. I'm gonna try to make it as succinct as possible. In my introduction, I neglected to say that I'm also the parent of a Los Angeles Unified School District kindergarten student. My partner is a UTLA member, a high school teacher here in Northeast LA, where I was born and raised. And so I say all that because I have relative privilege. I have a union job, I'm a union organizer. I have rent control, been in the same apartment building for, 15 years. And with all those privileges, this is like on a micro level now, it is hard as hell. Crisis distance learning is hard as hell. For parents, I wake up a few hours earlier every morning to do my own work. We set up our school-age child. Then I post up and try to do work while being IT, a TA, and then trying to squeeze in my child's homework in between my own union meetings. My partner's teaching, so she's just like out of the picture, right? He's in the same room, but he's out of the picture. Since we're talking about a Green New Deal, I'm here in California and you can't see out my window, but the sky is completely brown. I'm around 2 fires, and we have a record-breaking heat wave in addition to that. And so for the last 5 days, we've all been working in the same room. I have 1 box AC and 1 air filter. So we're all working and learning in the same room. And over the weekend, our power was going out every 20 minutes, so there are rolling blackouts. And I paint this picture for you all because this is us in our privilege, trying to teach and learn in LAUSD. Now, when I take a step back and contextualize that, I want everyone on the call to know that 80% of LAUSD students are at or below the poverty line. So this is my lived experience with 2 union jobs and healthcare coverage and housing. And that's what it looks like on a day-to-day. We're all in the same room trying to breathe and teach and learn and work. Everyone is trying their best the students, the educators, the paraprofessionals, the parents, the guardians, but it is hard as hell. And that's the micro level. On a macro level, as United Teachers Los Angeles, we know we won't solve these problems by just, quote, getting by, right? UTLA is currently organizing to defund the school police, which take up $70 million of our taxpayer money in the school district. We want that to go back to nurses, more social workers. We want more community schools. I said it earlier and I'll say it again, that California is the 5th largest economy in the whole damn world, but we are the 42nd out of 50 in per pupil funding for students. 42nd out of 50 in California. So again, we've built coalition. We're organizing every day after work to pass Prop 15 to tax the corporations and millionaires and billionaires in our state. And that should generate upwards of $12 billion. And that will go back into services and healthcare. We in UTLA know that budgets are moral documents. And they've, quite frankly, put our children and education workers last. So we're willing to build worker power. Again, we are always trying to stay strike ready through structure tests. And we know that worker organizing is the way to actually win. That's how we won big in 2019. And if we become lazy in our organizing, which we're not, we know that that's how we're going to actually win a Green New Deal that goes above and beyond the school district and its moral document or its budget. So that's the micro and macro problems that we're facing here in Los Angeles, smoky Los Angeles.
Thank you. Thank you. It's daunting. Jabari, I'm going to throw it to you for what's going on in New York.
Yeah, sure. So, I'll follow up on something Jollene said about just the severe underfunding. I'm sure that'll be a running theme of tonight, and just how, we as a society have tons of money for bombs and cops, but, not so much money for textbooks and for students, truly. So, our schools are underfunded, they're overcrowded. I teach in school, pre-COVID, when everyone was, in the building, we were so overcrowded that students would, at lunchtime, someone would be eating standing up, or they would be sneaking away into classrooms to eat, because there's not enough room in the cafeteria for them. They were like putting them in trailers outside behind the school for classes. It was just, it's ridiculous. And it's because we refuse to invest in more space for our students and more teachers to teach them, to decrease class sizes. In addition to that, some of them not having textbooks, materials just physically breaking down the schools. So there's that. There's the schools just not being underfunded. And even on top of being just traditional underfunding, New York City specifically is owed billions of dollars from the state government from a class action lawsuit, which have never materialized. So that's, it's like extra underfunded. But in addition to the just the school environment itself, our students suffer from all the other ways that we don't fund our communities, especially working class communities. So my students suffer from housing insecurity in New York City, which is one of the biggest, or the biggest school district in the country, has over 1 million students. 1 in 10 students are homeless or housing insecure. So we have tens of thousands, over 100,000 students that are homeless or housing insecure in our school district. I see that as a teacher. They don't even need to tell me. I just see it happen when I might see a student who's tired all the time. And every time I ask her, what's going on? Did she get enough sleep? It's oh, I was sleeping at my aunt's house last night, or oh, I was sleeping at my grandma's house, or oh, it was my cousin's house. And, she doesn't have a bed of her own. And that's really upsetting. I had this other student who, he disappeared in the middle of a week. And I didn't hear from his parents for 2 days. And they just said that they had to go up and move out of Brooklyn and move to Long Island. And, someone who grew up here in central Brooklyn, I know what that is. Nobody, you don't just, decide one day to pick up and move to Long Island. That's an eviction. So we have this incredible housing instability here. We have a lack of investment in our educational system. I mentioned transportation as an issue in my opening comments. but truly, you know, we have a general sense of not investing in the working class. And I guess, you know, I guess we'll talk more about how we're fixing that as socialists later, but it truly is, it's truly unfortunate. And, you know, I'm happy that we have, you know, people like me and Nikil about to, you know, seize power in our state legislatures to do something about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's hear now from Allison, from Hannah on the problems in her district.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Jollene and Jabari said. I know Jabari brought up it's a running theme about lack of school funding, but absolutely right. As a society, we're willing to fund cops, we're willing to fund all kinds of surveillance, and I'll talk about that in a second as it connects to COVID in this moment for schools, but we're not willing to fund, right, what would make our societies whole, what would allow us to be like fully developed, liberated people. We're not funding those things, and I think in Kansas, we have like a particularly horrible version of this, which is that when terrible right-wing former governor Sam Brownback was in office, he constitutionally underfunded the schools, so much so that they almost didn't open several years ago. Right now, we're in a different political situation where we have a moderate Democrat governor, but no better, right, in that we are still we're still living with the fallout of that extreme right-wing experiment, right? It was called the Brownback experiment. So we have so little funding for our schools per pupil, and that's that then now even by moderate Democrats and by like the neoliberals is touted as, oh, well, Kansas is doing great because we have low funding per pupil, but look at our test scores, right? So just this extreme investment in the models of the sort of austerity model of schooling, right? That's really focused on achievement and underfunding our schools at the same time. So that's a huge issue. I think the other thing as it relates to my work as a paraeducator, but I think also what's happening more broadly in schools across the country is that there's just a tremendous issue around disability justice, right? That so my role as a paraeducator, the 300 of us who work as paraeducators and serve students with individualized education plans, we're being told as of this week, we're in remote learning, that we are not going to get the hours we need to pay our bills. We make $10.99, about $10.99 an hour is starting, and most people don't make more than 13 after even being there, you know, for 20 years. So, but then we're also being told we're not going to get our hours. So it's like, why is it that a school district that has budgeted for this is now using this crisis to justify austerity and to say that we're not able to serve our students during this time, especially our students with disabilities? And then just the last thing I'd say is to echo what Jollene raised around policing, that in this time in COVID, because of COVID, we're already seeing those already punitive policies, like the policies around truancy, be used to continue policing marginalized students with disabilities, Black, Brown, and Indigenous students in new ways, right? So that particularly around truancy, that policing, I think, is just an incredible challenge in this moment. And then on top of all that, the building I work in was closed last year because it had black mold in the ventilation system, but we're still, many of us being expected to go into buildings during this time.
Thank you, and thank you for raising up this issue of this ongoing intensified policing in schools. Such a crisis. Nikil, what's happening in Philadelphia?
Thank you. This is just hugely illuminating and hugely sobering. I just, from everyone, I just want to, you know, state, you know, from the outset, I'm not currently organizing in classrooms, and I'm not, or in a teachers in unions, and I'm not in a classroom. So I want to, you know, I can't speak to that inside view. And I have a toddler, but who's not yet of school going age. And so, but what I have seen both from my work in the past and just ongoing is the inequality in funding that we're certainly all addressing. I mean, the lack of funding, but also the inequality in it across school districts within a state. expresses itself in Philadelphia in particular in the state of the school infrastructure. So just to indicate the level of inequality we have, it's 49th, I believe, in the nation in school inequity and inequality across districts. And so not a great statistic, but you see that across a single avenue in Philadelphia. So on the Philadelphia side of City Line Avenue, you have students that are funded about $18,000 per student. And you cross the street, and then you're in a different school district in the suburbs, cross city line, and the students are funded. The student per capita funding is about $42,000, and so that's the dramatic inequity, and the result is that the Philadelphia school district, which is not surprisingly overwhelming majority Black and brown school district, that's true of a lot of the city school districts in Pennsylvania, is deeply underfunded. It's a manifestation of racial capitalism, and you see it in the school infrastructure, which is toxic and is failing our students. It is making everyone sick. We just regularly they regularly expose children to chipped and peeling lead paint. Teachers are routinely diagnosed with mesothelioma, which is a form of cancer correlated with prolonged exposure to asbestos. Ceilings cave in during rainstorms, heating and cooling systems fail. And there was a report in 2017 that suggested that 85 out of the 266 Philadelphia school buildings required major renovation. Another 20 were at a state of deterioration that put them possibly beyond repair. But these were schools that students still attended. They still attended schools. At some point this year, the exposure was, or in the last year or so, the exposure was so terrible, the exposed asbestos, for example, sick teachers, that they closed several schools. And so you spoke earlier about students needing to wear masks inside school buildings. I mean, that's the situation. They are toxic. So the kind of toxicity of the infrastructure is the thing that I think people feel the most. But that's fundamentally the way that the schools are funded and how we invest in schools and what we choose to invest in, as everyone has been saying. Beyond that, I mean, I think there's much more to say, but I'll just kind of linger on that.
Thank you, Nikil. This is really sobering to hear. Now I want to note, I think it's so powerful that we're starting with this very intense look at all the different intersecting crises. Several years ago, the activist group 350.org had this great campaign on climate, Connect the Dots, which was about connect the dots between the climate science and the extreme weather events. But I think as socialists, we have to go further. We have to connect the dots between the climate emergency and racial capitalism and its manifestations in schools. And then we have to go one step further, which is connect the dots in our solutions. So we're not saying, oh, that school has black mold, but we're going to put a solar panel on the roof. Problem solved, right? It's not about that. And we're not going to replace an HVAC system with a fossil fueled heating with an electric heat pump and then leave the asbestos in the walls for insulation, obviously. And it would also be crazy to just tackle the buildings themselves and not all the issues around funding in terms of students and the workers there, right? As Nikil was laying out, right? So totally decarbonized buildings, but where across the street, the per pupil funding is different by a degree of more than a ratio of 2 to 1 is obviously not acceptable from a socialist or simply like a humane point of view. So I think we want to move now. How can public investment start to tackle these problems and connect dots and build up that kind of Green New Deal for schools idea that's comprehensive and holistic? Nikil, you ran on a platform in part, including a Green New Deal for schools, and won a smashing victory against an extremely well-funded incumbent. And with support, by the way, from like an electricians union, which is, everybody was surprised, but came out strongly also for this Green New Deal vision. So as we talk about what can a public investment agenda do to tackle some of these problems, Nikil, will you please kick us off?
Sure. I mean, so, as I think that as I think we've been identifying, and I hope we'll kind of elaborate here, this is a holistic issue. I mean, there's a totality to everything that we're talking about. And so, but what we ran on, the reason that we proposed a Green New Deal for schools, I'll just mention again, the kind of, I think we've all identified like obvious disparities where we fund one thing and we don't fund another thing. We fund police, we fund prisons, and we don't fund schools. We have money for everything, every kind of imperialist venture that the United States wants to indulge itself in, but not for our school districts. But it was just a very literal connection when we did devote $2 million in state funding to remediate lead and asbestos for a luxury hotel on city-owned land, and we're closing schools for that same reason. So just noting that, and starting to see toxicity not simply as an issue of remediating lead and asbestos, but as an environmental issue. I think we are starting to connect as a movement, or have long connected asthma rates and air quality, things like that, to the notion, to what we're doing, our larger project of fighting climate change, environmental justice, and also moving to a clean energy future. We thought that we need green investment to begin, if not, by no means fully solve the crisis of underinvestment in our school infrastructure, and chiefly because it is public infrastructure. It is, in some theory, commonly held. Daniel, you're a proponent of a Green New Deal for public housing. It kind of takes the same idea. We have this. This is ours. Shouldn't we be investing in it and demonstrating that we can make these environments less toxic, environmentally sustainable? So what we focused on was that the other thing that we wanted to keep in mind was that school buildings are institutions that anchor a neighborhood. They're also like recreation centers, things like that. Most children in the United States go to school. Most of them go to public schools. They open up for social occasions. So we need to think of them as buildings that are held in common and treat them as as resilient. Resilient is kind of a terrible term, but resilient, I'm just using it right now for the future. And so, a huge amount of green investment, whether that comes from a federal level, whether that comes in the form of liquidity from the Federal Reserve, it's not a bad idea, could basically begin to improve our systems. So the US government estimated that about 41% of all school districts, so 36,000 school buildings urgently require updates to their heating, ventilation, and cooling systems. This is pressure that's going to mount even under the best climate mitigation scenarios. So we need to, I think that's just a start, but that we can also move to a net zero carbon neutral infrastructure. We can use retrofits, green stormwater infrastructure, green roofs, sustainable and recycled materials, passive school design. I mean, these are things that would not only fix our schools, would not only make them models in some ways, but they would generate thousands of new jobs. And in a way, they would unite all of the issues that we face as parents, as teachers, and as workers. I think it's one of these things that you mentioned being supported in our campaign, at least by the Electricians Union. Part of it was the idea that we would be demonstrating in some way what a green future would look like. We can do that by investing in this public infrastructure in our schools. And then finally, I just want to mention that I think this is not just an infrastructural project, but an educational one. And I would kind of I don't want to speak too much to this because I'm not a teacher, but this is something, there are these sort of green schools initiatives. I'm curious to hear from the teachers on this call about them, but where they seem to me sort of, you community gardens in schools, things like that. There's activities that are meant across the country, but really a national or state level or a national project to unite everyone around the project of greening and remediating all our schools could really be a project that brings students and teachers and parents together in this project of a national project of a Green New Deal. It would happen educationally, it would happen, and the students are our future. They will be, as Jabari mentioned. And this is a meaningful way to make that real. So those are the kinds of ideas that we ran on in our platform.
Thank you, Nikil. It's incredible to realize how close at hand this far more beautiful vision is, and that that's winning elections, and not just an easy election against Republican, but defeating an incredibly well-resourced incumbent around this far more compelling vision. Hannah, I'll ask you to go next, and then followed by Jabari.
Great. Okay. Nikil, I think listening to you talk opened up so much for me in thinking about, and I had read your platform and Green New Deal for Schools agenda, but I think one of the things I'm keenly aware of is the way in which our school systems, and this differs across the country, but on the whole, our school systems are not run democratically. And our unions actually are the only sort of backstop for making sure that our schools are run democratically, and our parent organizations and the ways in which parents and caregivers and young people are just making democracy happen through organizing in their schools, which I think is amazing. So I think that's one potential really important opening of a Green New Deal for public schools, is the opportunity to democratically decide in our communities and our school systems, as educators, as young people, as families, caregivers, parents, and broader communities, to decide for ourselves what we want this investment to look like and what that means to us. And I think that's really crucial, and even sort of harkens back to like great society programs like Head Start, some of those programs that are still around today because they are of such necessity as capitalism spins out of control. And so, yeah, so I think of that, of sort of the bright spots of those types of social programs, right, that continue to feed kids and continue to make sure that people not yet of school age, young people not yet of school age, have educational spaces in their lives, and working parents have childcare. So I think of that democracy as one element. I think just another piece that I think is personal to my work is the principle of disability justice around wholeness, and recognizing that we are more, right? We are humans, and young people, students in our schools, are humans first, not like achievement machines and capitalist production machines, but that we're people. So this is a kind of like minor example of this, but I've been teaching in a district space and learning in a district space that's off-site for the last few years until this year. And one of the most wonderful things about that space was we didn't have to have fluorescent lights in that space. And that's like such a big deal for our people in our classroom space, right? For me too, is that just like having sunlight from windows rather than awful fluorescent lighting. So I say that to say that like the potential for expanding our wholeness as whole people in school systems through the possibility of public investment through a Green New Deal for public schools, I think is really exciting and important.
Thank you so much. I love the expanded democracy comment. And on sunlight, I mean, the biggest architecture award in the European Union last year, the Mies van der Rohe Award, went to a retrofit of public housing that massively improved the exposure to the sky. And the Sterling Award, the best architecture award for new construction in the United Kingdom, went to new energy efficient public housing. And I think if we imagine bringing that spirit to school, the architectural ingenuity, if the public sector brought the best architects into this sector, it's almost unimaginable how beautiful this process could be, especially informed by students' own desires for their spaces. I'll turn it over to Jabari.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna make like, two quick points. So one of the things I love about, the proposed Green New Deal is the deep investment in housing and rehabilitating, not just, everyone's, certifications and like energy uses, but also just rehabilitating like public housing. And, in New York, our public housing stock, we have hundreds of thousands of units, and like, basically an entire like city of people, an inner city of people living inside public housing, and it's really about to fall down. It's been so disinvested over decades and decades, and like as socialists, the notion of being able to just rehabilitate all that socialized public housing stock and then which would open the gate to build more, is beautiful to me, knowing one, that housing is a human right, but two, that 1 in 10 of the students in New York are housing or home insecure, and that I have students that do not have homes or homes or beds that they can call their own. I would love, if we just invest in housing for every single one of us. And then just a second point, like thinking back about like why it's always Black people or people of color, immigrant communities in urban settings that are more likely to have asthma, and just thinking about the air quality that we breathe and just the lack of green spaces that are often in the areas that, working class people of color communities live in, and how we could green those areas, being more green into those. And just like, riffing off of like, what Nikil was saying earlier about, better garden projects and like, green spaces for schools, like absolutely. And like, if we start reclaiming more street space from, single-use automobiles and start investing more in public transit, like we're already seeing that in New York, people reclaiming the road from cars for outdoor dining, and everyone loves it. And if we, keep on going down that road of reclaiming more road space, every school could have a garden right out in front, from just reclaiming space like that. And it is something that, the students would love, and that would, help improve air quality and also just a sense of peace in schools, while we're talking about, looking for ways to, help improve the emotional climate inside of these buildings.
Jabari, you're blowing my mind. You're connecting the dots of all the different public infrastructures, and it's just like the vision of the socialist green city is like flowering inside of my brain. Yes. It's like overwhelming. Jollene.
I think that the other panelists, Hannah, Nikil, and Jabari, have done a good job of putting forth the vision, right? Now we have in our minds what the end goal is. So I think the only thing that I would like to add as an organizer is I wanted to share one of the conversations of several of us UTLA organizers had in planning for the strike. We were sitting around and talking about power. And we talked about how, unlike other work sites, schools are in almost every one of our neighborhoods, especially in our large cities. They touch our lives in a way that other places of power or sites of power do not, because you're going to have to walk by one, drive by one, you're going to know someone that works there, you would have gone to one of your neighborhood schools. And so I encourage everyone on the call to think about schools as a site of potential, organizing potential that we may not see in other industries. When you engage an entire school community, you have a very rare opportunity to put an immense amount of power on decision makers to win the vision that was put forth by the other panelists. Or if they don't budge, we also have the opportunity to replace our decision makers. As what, we see that with Jabari and Nikil's elections, right? So, in addition to the vision, I see schools as sites of power, a roadmap to actually like win and take it back in a way that I have not seen in my previous union organizing in healthcare or in the public sector. So that's the only thing I'd like to add to what the other panelists have said. Thank you.
That's extremely helpful, actually, and it sets the stage perfectly for the next round of our conversation, the way that schools fit into these organizing and political contexts and landscapes. So where I think what we want to talk about now and really dig in is all right, this isn't the first time, obviously, that socialists or progressives more broadly are digging in on school organizing. So the question is based on the histories that we've had, recent histories or maybe longer histories of fighting to democratize school districts, bring education justice, what are the kind of big barriers that we have run up against in the past, or even just in fights for large public investment? What are the strategies that are working or that we should experiment with that will deliver victories this time in this context of COVID, climate emergency, massive election, whatever, you name it. So really getting into that organizing mentality, learning the lessons from past experiences, because this isn't the first round of this, and working together to develop that strategy so that this time we're really bringing home massive, massive victories. So Hannah, I'm going to ask you to kick off this round.
Okay, great. I have a long list of challenges. I don't have a deep analysis of the opportunities. So I'll start with the challenges and yeah, I'll try to bring it back to opportunities. So I think one of the biggest challenges, I would say, from both my DSA perspective and my paraeducator union perspective, is that we're waging a war on multiple fronts. So we're talking about a January 2021 or an August 2021 where we don't have the state tax revenue to open our school buildings in some cases because of mass unemployment. So that's one piece, right? But then we're also federal funding for schools and federal funding for public investment is a huge piece of this. And so for DSA in particular, right, we're also just in terms of things that are sobering in a reality check, not powerful enough, right? We're trying to become a mass organization. We are working in coalition, right? Moving in a way to amass the social force necessary to have the power to create this incredible public investment or to pressure for this incredible public investment, or in the case of Nikil and Jabari, to like be the lawmakers yourselves to do that in your respective states, which is so amazing and exciting. And we're again having to wage war on all fronts, both at the state level and the federal level. And our enemies are incredibly powerful and organized. So like from the white supremacists to Trump to the neoliberal Democrats, right? They are moving in such a way that it just makes it very difficult for us, especially narratively, right? Like even just seeing the news about Trump saying we're canceling diversity training, and like no critical race theory, right? Which totally is a signal to his base, but is, I think, important in the way we think about how we're framing a major round of public investment and how we are overcoming that, right? And having deep transformative conversations and moving people through organizing to our narrative, right, about what's happening in the world. So I think that's hard. And then just at the local level, and I'm sure this is true for other folks, there's something called the unified command that essentially is making decisions in this emergency time. I talked about sort of the emergency austerity politics, but the unified command in our district is the hospital, which is like the third largest employer here, the Chamber of Commerce, the university, which is the largest employer and has chosen to totally unsafely, the administration, bring students back on campus, which has caused our COVID rates to spike here in Lawrence. So that unified command of businesses and of course the university functioning like a business is making decisions. And I think for our school district, for our young people, right? So it's no wonder then that we're back in buildings. So that level of coordination, and then also the just unquestioning, like how oftentimes we, myself included, like don't even question that these businesses are making decisions for our communities, like ridiculous. So I think those are some challenges. I think the other thing that I'll say that I think is both a challenge and an opportunity is that we are living through an incredibly traumatic and heartbreakingly awful time. Like one of the things that happened in my week this week was I had a coworker on the phone from the union telling me like, I'm so happy to be in the union because I couldn't afford dog food, but because I'm in the union, I met somebody who I could call this week who works at my school who like helped me get dog food. So that is like a heartbreaking story and emblematic of the trauma and just the incredibly awful things that are happening in the world around us, and the way in which working class and poor people in this country are struggling. And in that is our potential for connection and our potential for solidarity and organizing and building something totally anew, right? Imagining out of the ashes of this crisis a completely different world, and schools are absolutely, I think, just as Jollene lifted up, a really important site of doing that in our communities, of completely reimagining a different world.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really beautifully put. I'm going to turn to Jabari now, and after that will come Jollene and then Nikil.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with talking about like just money and how money is spoken about, and like how challenges that I've already heard coming from other, political affiliations, challenges from people on the right saying, not even just green investment, any investment in school. Like, don't we spend enough money on these public school students already? Aren't we spending so much money and not getting the results? What's the use of throwing more money down the drain? Which is like, well, one, you can never invest too much in education because it's the future. Two, when you compare us to, how much are students getting spent on, how much is getting spent on students at elite private schools, right? So there's that argument, but even from the center or just your moderate Democrats or even quote unquote liberal Democrats, there's the budgetary notion, the politics of austerity, the pitting of one good thing against another good thing, and how can we possibly afford to put more money into schools? More money into schools is less money for hospitals. More money into schools is less money for housing or and job creation, which is one, a great opportunity, for us as socialists to reframe the conversation. Because when we think about budgets, it goes back to what Jollene was saying earlier, a budget is a moral document, which, we need to be reminded of. But also it gives us a chance as a socialist to remind people that, budgets are not inflexible things. So for example, in New York, the government is saying, we don't have income from this, we don't have income for that. We're cutting the budget for education by $5 billion. And one, that's terrible, but two, it's given us as socialists and progressives and people in movements on the left a chance to say, wait a minute. What about all the billionaires that have gotten richer since the beginning of COVID? And in New York State specifically, we have over 100 billion, 118, 120 billionaires who've made over $77 billion since the time, since COVID shut down everything. So, there's your budget gap right there. There's your full funding for education right there, and your full funding for housing and a climate, transition. And it's all right there. And, every time, these arguments get presented, it gives us an opportunity to say, actually, we're not allocating funding in our society in an equitable or even sensible manner.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's the math, actually. It's not just the climate math. That's essential math. Jollene.
Co-sign on what Jabari just said. I would like us to focus on our opportunities. The money is there. And I believe it's our duty to redirect it, or what our favorite Uncle Carl says, seize it, right? Put it somewhere else. We are talking about socialism anyway, so let's just put it out there. And, I think that the right wing wants us to stray away from our organizing principles, because they know that ever since the 1930s, worker organizing gets the job done. That seizing that we're talking about, they want us to do symbolic gestures of protest, when actually our strategies are pretty tried and true. In 2010, all the way until 2014, my partner is a high school teacher, was laid off every summer. And then he was rehired as a substitute for himself, 2010 to 2014. So he worked, minimum wage jobs in the summer. We did our best to get by. But it was in 2014 that a group of organized progressive educators decided to run and take leadership of United Teachers Los Angeles. And that was after decades of the union just not fighting. And I was hired by that leadership as an organizer. So I got to see on the inside how systematic organizing alongside progressive leadership can really just shut shit down. It's just a simple formula, and they want to distract us with everything else. I truly believe that education unions have the potential to strike and win everything on the table. Everything, housing, the Green New Deal, everything. We have the potential to shut everything down, and there's nothing holding us back from doing so. Earlier Hannah was saying that the opposition is incredibly powerful and organized. We have that potential as well. there's nothing holding us back. Yes, I agree that we live in a traumatic time. And I frequently talk about this with other feminist organizers in Affirm and in United Teachers Los Angeles. And something that we do together is we remind each other of what our families, what our ancestors have survived leading up to this point, that gave us the chance to be here. My grandmother alone was a comfort woman in World War II in the Philippines. She was taken by the imperial soldiers and she survived. And I feel like now that I have that chance, what am I gonna do with this life? And I think that every organizer here comes from a family that has struggled to just be alive. And I think that we should use this life and this opportunity to get organized, get together, implement the strategies that we know have been tried and are successful, and taking back, as Uncle Carl says, seize that money and give it back to the people that deserve it, which is us, because we generate the wealth for this country. I look forward to organizing with everyone on the call, on the live stream, because I really think we could take it back, and I really believe that we can win, or else I don't think any of us would be here.
Thank you. And it's so moving to, I mean, UTLA has been such an example in the last few years. It's so moving to hear that story. Nikil.
I'm actually in tears. I'm sorry. That was just really moving. And I was in tears earlier about when Hannah told that story about. Oh man. Anyway, I'm sorry. I thank you all for sharing these stories. I think it really takes a lot, and it is meaningful to a lot of us. I just, I think we've spoken to the importance of struggle. I think the one thing I would just say briefly, and I think it was sort of broached already in what Hannah was saying, is the funny thing that these, we're talking about schools, we're talking about public schools, and these things that are supposedly public, that should be ours, that our societies, they're held in common, don't feel that way. And they don't feel that way for any number of reasons, but a lot of them is that public school bureaucracies are captured in various ways by private interests, whether they're literally privatized, there's like literally pulling away through charterization, or there's consultants that are hired. You're like, the school district has no money for X, Y, and Z, but they just paid millions of dollars to this consulting firm to do a study to prove that the schools are toxic, and we already knew that, and so there's just this way in which you're like, well, what, we're actually shut out like in all these ways. I mean, Hannah mentioned the Chamber of Commerce being a kind of partner in decision making. So I feel like people experience these public institutions and they experience the domination within them. This is true of public housing too, that this is, again, it's an institution that is ours in some sense, but people feel alienated by for very good reason. And so I think that's one of the big challenges that we face, that when we seek public investment and we seek public investment into public institutions, there's so many ways in which we're not sure that that's going to be done equitably, or that it's going to be done democratically, and the decision making is going to be done in a way that we feel like is responsible. Already we have the evidence of that just in the where schools are cited. Why are schools cited so often next to incinerators, or why are they so often cited next to on landfill or reclaimed land, things like that. And so, which, to say nothing of why we have incinerators, and but we can get in that I think that starts to broach the whole problem. But I will just say that so much of, and this speaks to what Jollene was saying, that so much of the actual victories that we have seen on the left have come out of union movements, and not and certain, like, union victories, and then out of those union victories, electoral victories. Two of the most progressive city council people in Philadelphia came directly out of schools organizing against privatization, against charterization, against the closure of schools. And so that is where because I feel like, and again, evoking something Jollene said, that you can place the school at the center, at the symbolic and literal, in some sense, center of so many of our society in various ways. And so I think when that happens, when people feel that deeply, you can move a lot of things. And so that's why I think there are opportunities here.
Thank you, Nikil. And yeah, it is both overwhelming. I mean, it's overwhelming at every angle, really. Like the stories of how the situation is, where we're coming from, how intense the struggles have been just to get so far, and there's so much further to go. But then at the same time, to imagine like it really is within grasp. I mean, the levels of investment we're talking about, if you put 200 billion into schools, I mean, you would not get the United States anywhere near to the levels of public investment that are commonplace in Western Europe. I mean, so the idea that we can't afford this, right? Corporate profits have been going up, wages have been going down. There is money. I mean, there is just so much money. As Nikil said, you just cross the street in many cases, and you can see it. I was lucky. I grew up in the heyday of Toronto public schools. My elementary school, we learned about racial profiling in class, and it was like the dominant value was anti-racism, and Toronto's changed. It's not like that anymore. But hearing all this makes me realize how privileged in a way I was to grow up in just with a functional school system, and it gives a certain confidence that this is like 100% achievable on this continent. And Canada is very far from a socialist utopia, let me tell you. This is a huge topic, and reflecting that, we have questions from like all over the place. I'm going to read 3 of the questions that have come through the Q&A. I'd encourage you, panelists, just bite off whatever you want to chew from those questions. And in addition to that, if at some point you scan through, there are other questions you want to take a swing at, go for it. So we'll do one round of Q&A. I think we'll definitely have time to do another. There's just so much out here right now, and there's some really rich thoughts in the questions. So 3 that I think put some pretty interesting questions or ideas on the table. One from Lindsay England, she asks, as an elementary school teacher, I wonder what is the appropriate approach to integrating the urgency of climate change action education into meaningful and appropriate curriculum models. Beyond the policy and structures, how do we prepare the next generation for their future? And this is something, there are some educators on this call, and Nikil as well mentioned the idea that the actual green transformation of the schools would itself provide new educational spaces for thinking about the environment. So one question is like, how do we bring this into the education itself of children, the climate emergency? Another question from Anonymous, here, scroll through here. Anonymous attendee. Hello, Senator Saval, but I think this pertains to all of you, and especially as well, Jabari. How can Greater Philadelphian school students work to enact Green New Deal legislation? I'm in high school, we're seeing the manifestation of racial capitalism. Where do we start to change these as students? And I think high school students all over the country, obviously, including many lucky enough to be in YDSA chapters, but obviously many high school students not yet. And then from Diane asks a question, since housing is still segregated in America, doesn't part of implementing a GND in schools have to imagine building an infrastructure of desegregated neighborhoods, prioritizing housing for those who have insecure housing? Doesn't reparations have to be part of this process? So I think picking up on some of the comments Jabari made, right, there's a whole agenda of desegregation and reparation that's hard to separate from this agenda of schools. So I have a question about education, a question about high school students joining this fight, and a question about how this fits into a broader agenda of undoing eco-apartheid, really, in our communities. Jabari, you haven't had a question first yet, so I'm going to throw you into the hot seat, and then the others get ready, because it's coming to you next.
Oh my God, I had trouble unmuting myself. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so I'm just going to answer the second question briefly, and I might chime in a little later on others, if that's cool. But what's really exciting is that, when I think of today's youth, they're organizing at levels that I certainly was not doing in high school. Like, the national movements we've seen over gun violence, over the climate specifically, have just been truly revolutionary, in my opinion. And we truly, we have a real opportunity to bring students to be politically active in something that feels very critical to them. They feel it. They know that there may not be a breathable planet when they grow up, and it's scary. It's scary for them. And, I don't know what sort of legislation is going through, other state legislatures, but I know in New York, we are, pushing for, bills to more rapidly transition off of fossil fuels, and getting more students involved in that and plugging them in is incredible. Or, if they want to plug in at a national level and, pushing, Joe Biden to have a more aggressive climate platform. These are great ways for them to get involved. And it's something I think they would take very kindly to, because it's very personal for them. A lot of things are very personal for them, but climate change is up there.
Yeah, thanks. And just quickly before I throw it to Jollene, I would be remiss if I never mentioned this. The Biden plan, we could talk all night about it, but it does include, he says, $2 trillion stimulus in clean everything. Green, $2 trillion stimulus. That's his promise, recent promise post-convention. And he says 40% of that will go to disadvantaged communities in terms of benefits. That's $800 billion. And in there is a reference to a school funding bill that has zero content, actually, I looked it up. But it says $75 billion for schools, Joe Biden has endorsed. So you can pull out of his plan essentially the beginnings of a Green New Deal for schools. I mean, again, $2 trillion in the green economy, of which $800 billion should go to frontline communities, what he calls disadvantaged communities, and specific reference to schools as in desperate need of repair. And I think, elevating that, he has promised that, perhaps by accident. And especially like in swing states, it's not that we are all going to endorse and be so excited about Biden, but the political atmosphere is changing, and there is on the table this notion that we have to pour funds into disadvantaged communities, that they should be green funds, that they should be in some sense holistic. And we as socialists have a chance to define concretely what that looks like, including before the election, such that if Democrats win, then we have those very concrete demands to make. So I don't know, I just had to throw that in there. I meant to say it earlier, but I think that for understandable reasons, folks on this call might not all be spending their evenings at joebiden.com. I do it so you don't have to. But if you go, there are openings in there, big openings. Okay, I'm gonna throw it to Jollene and then Nikil.
I think I like that second question as well. I mean, for any young people on the call or on live, streaming live, history has shown that young people have always been integral, central to our freedom movements and in leadership of our freedom movements. In Los Angeles, Students Deserve was built. The schools that students deserve. It's a youth-led organization within LAUSD schools, and they were the ones that put the end to random searches on the strike agenda. They were the ones that said that you want students to be on the picket line with you, then you end these racist searches of our property, of our backpacks and our lockers and of our bodies. The youth in Los Angeles were the ones that said, we gotta defund the school police. What are you gonna do about it, UTLA? Are you gonna stand with the students, or are you gonna stand with the racists? And I think similarly, we see that all across the environmental justice movements around the world, from the indigenous movements in what we know as Canada to all over Asia, all over Latin America. And so to any youth that are on the call, I would say that I want to follow you. They've been the ones to really push the agenda left. And I believe that it's our job to listen to the youth because they're gonna live on this planet longer than we are. So get organized, whether that's joining Students Deserve in Los Angeles or YDSA or building a chapter. I think that's the first step. And then let's work together, because we wouldn't have won all these anti-racist demands without the youth telling us that this is what was necessary for them to live their lives.
Thank you. Thanks so much for centering this agenda internationally, including like a global anti-racist agenda and a global youth movement. Deeply appreciate that. Nikil.
I just wanted, if I could just speak in briefly to both the kind of the question that I guess was the one about about Philadelphia students, which we just have been talking about, but also about housing segregation, because I think that's, you know, it's just important to remember that we've kind of let we as a society did attempt, you know, with whatever success and with however much in bad faith in certain respects, to desegregate school districts across the country. And it's like now referred to as busing, but it wasn't. That was just a technique that was one way of desegregating school districts, and it became a pejorative term for various reasons, not least some elected officials who fought against it. But I think, and it's failed, and we've actually regressed. I mean, many school districts are more segregated than they were, you know, prior to. I mean, in some ways, prior to before Brown versus Board of Education. So I think but that is tied to housing deeply. It is tied to racism in housing patterns. It is tied to racial capitalism. And so we really need housing desegregation and building affordable housing in communities across the country, preserving it where it exists, converting existing housing, and building it in areas where people have fought it. I mean, I think we're going to face both things. I think that we have a kind of nominal commitment on the part of a lot of people to social desegregation, to the idea that Black Lives Matter, but that we have to test it. We have to test it, and we're going to test it very strongly if we really attempt, again, as a society, to build affordable housing, to build public housing again, social housing, in rich neighborhoods. If we attempt to create metropolitan catchments. I'm not by no means an expert on how catchments work, so I don't want to speak too much to it, but I just want to mention that that's enough. I can cross the street in my house and be in a different school catchment, and that defines the property values in our neighborhood. So absolutely. And finally, just in terms of student organizing, I mean, you know, like Jollene and Jabari have said, it's just I think we're all I personally am embarrassed by how much better organized the students are than I was, and, you know, like just and than I am. I mean, it's just like it's truly inspiring. But we need it on a statewide level. Like I would just love to see, and I think is to see students across districts organizing. And actually, just to bring that City Line Avenue example, which I talked about earlier, where you cross the street and students, you get different levels of investment. Students from both sides of that district actually organized a march together, under the rubric of Black Lives Matter, but under, like, you know, school desegregation, school funding. So that was just a local instance, but I think that would be a major move, is if people in other parts of our state, this is not just an urban issue, or, you know, it's a rural issue. School districts across Pennsylvania, I'm sure across New York State, certainly across California, where I'm from originally, like these are felt everywhere, these issues. So making that felt in an organized statewide fashion, I think would be really meaningful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's super concrete and extremely helpful. Hannah.
Yeah, so on this question, in terms of youth organizing, I mean, I think I'd echo what other folks have raised. Just Philly specifically, like, to be very concrete, the Philadelphia Student Union, who is one of the partners in the Demand Safe Schools Coalition, right? So thinking about how can that organizing that's already happening in Philly Student Union around police-free schools, how can that power and amazing work, right? And maybe I don't super know Philly Student Union, so Nikil maybe knows that they're also already doing Green New Deal stuff, but thinking about the intersections of that work. And I think that's one of the most exciting things also about the work DSA is doing, and why DSA is doing as a part of this Demand Safe Schools Coalition, along with UTLA, along with CTU in Chicago, and more caucus folks in New York, and some of us from Kansas, is that organizing at the intersections, right? That we've all been talking about, of how do we fight to defund the police and invest in social services, right? And stop the racist policing that's happening even in our school systems. So that on the youth question. I have some thoughts on the educator question, or how to talk to young children about climate change. And I'm technologically, this is a bad example of me as an educator not knowing. I mean, maybe it's a good example of how to use Zoom. But there's a great Rethinking Schools article that I think I can link in one of the chats about how the Green New Deal is an opportunity to work with young people to become climate activists, even early childhood, right? Or even in our early childhood education. So I would just say again that, like, it's all about democratizing education to that question. So, like, how can we as educators, as caregivers and parents, support young people even in early childhood to engage with the world on their own terms, in a way that connects them to our whole ecological system. So I think that's one of the things that's lifted up in that Rethinking Schools article. But again, going back to, like, wholeness and our connectedness to ourselves and our whole ecosystem.
Thank you. Okay, we've had so much structured fun. I want to just give everyone 1 minute to say whatever they want before I close out. So respond to any issues, if you want to mention the pandemic, current campaigns, whatever. And then we will finish up with some asks of our attendees. So I'll just ask for for a minute, closing thoughts, Jollene, Nikil, Jabari, and then Hannah.
I'd like to just speak quickly to, like, the racial component of a Green New Deal, and how beautiful it is that there is a racial component, and how this, notion of a just transition really, like, breaks away from, like, traditional, like, liberal forms of the Green movement, because it truly is, like, Black people, people of color, that the most impacted by this, and at the international level, that's the global South. But even, like, even in New York City, some of the areas worst hit when we have, hurricanes are Black and brown communities that are right by bodies of water. They get, flooded or get, really destroyed by these. And when you really prioritize those communities, not just in rehabilitating them, but also in the jobs and ensuring that they are, like, first in line to have, like, the good union paying jobs that are retrofitting our buildings and building resiliency in these communities, that's a deep, deep investment that can last for years and generations in Black and brown communities.
Yes, thank you. Nikil or Jollene?
I'll just speak. You kind of alluded to this, Daniel, and I'll just kind of lift it up a little bit, and it may just be my swing state perspective, but I just feel like I do feel like this is a real opportunity. Like, we do actually have some time now in these next couple months pre-election to make this case. I mean, I think that we're going to try to make it here in Pennsylvania. I'm going to try to make it that we have, like, that we deserve this, that we deserve funding, that we deserve federal funding, that we deserve attention to what's going on in our school systems. And I think that this is a time that we can demand it. I think the other thing is, I've often wanted, just as someone on the left who is incensed by one development project or another, or incensed by where money is going and where it isn't. I mean, but especially in, like, the built environment, and just wanting to say that this is what I want instead. This is what we want. This is what we as a society have demanded. And I think this project is for me, it's that. Like, I think that this is our public schools. Like, we can have a Green New Deal for our public schools, and, like, this is what it looks like. This is what our society. This is what we've been saying, we socialists, all along. It looks like this, and so that I think would be really, really important if we could achieve.
Thank you, Jollene.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me on this panel. before United Teachers Los Angeles organized, the school district wanted us to go back to school. They wanted all educators and students to go back into our schools. And it was only when we took a vote that they decided that distance learning, despite all the research that we presented at the table, was the best option. I'm speaking as a second-generation Filipino American. My entire family, except for this particular household, are healthcare workers. I've already lost 2 aunts, registered nurses, and my uncle is currently in the ICU as a dialysis tech. When we say we have to organize to win, it quite literally means life or death for our families. And so I guess the last thing I want to say is I want everyone on here to just join something. Join a movement. We're not going to win. Everything that we've done so far to stay alive has been because of our movements. Nothing has been given to us. Nothing. Not even a mask for my sister-in-law who's in the ICU for 4 12-hour shifts a week. So that's my closing, is please get organized, whether it's DSA, I'm with United Teachers Los Angeles, get involved in your union, I'm in a firm, like just get organized. They want to use us, use our lives, our bodies as experiments or as campaign slogans. They don't care about workers and they don't care about people of color. They don't care about women. They don't care about the LGBT community. We are disposable to them. So that is the last thing that I'd like to say on this panel. It's either Green New Deal or death.
Thank you. That's beautifully put in 100%. That's the truth we need to live with and organize with. Hannah.
Yeah, so I will build on that, right? That like it is organize or die. It is the Green New Deal or die. It is get cops out of school or kids continue to be criminalized and arrested and potentially die in jail and murdered by vigilante police. So it is, yes, so echo Jollene that the stakes here are death and incredible trauma. And completely agree that that through movement we can transform our world. And then also just want to add, as an educator, that we also transform ourselves and our communities when we organize together in movements and in organizations. And I have seen that through my union, right? That we have changed each other through organizing. Like we have made more socialists. Some of them don't know yet, but we've made more socialists through our union. And I specifically like in introducing people to the power and organizing of UTLA, of CTU, of other amazing teachers unions across the country, have helped begin the process of people becoming socialists, right? And believing in their own power to transform the world. And our power together to transform the world. So I would just, I guess, sign off with that to say, second, join an organization, join DSA, especially since I'm on the National Political Committee. But also, right, if you don't have a union, you can build one. It's really hard, but totally possible. And folks are organizing in all kinds of formations, whether that's unions or student groups or DSA, all across the country. So excited to see folks on this call do that and to be in struggle with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an incredible evening and panel. I really, really grateful and humbled to hear you all speak so much from the heart, as well as sharing such profound, like, strategic and political insights and speaking philosophically. I don't normally hang out in education politics spaces, and now I think I will move here for life. It's like a transformative human experience, just any 20 minutes of this panel. Like, again, I mean, the deep, deep philosophical wisdom and intense emotional truth, and a lot of it is very hard truth. As the panelists are closing saying, we have to organize. It is life or death. That's what this decade is. That's what these months are. So join the Democratic Socialists of America. Thierry Francos will post links for that. please join the Eco-Socialist Working Group of the DSA, which is very much working on this. And there is a Safe Schools action that you can pledge to take with DSA. So take a minute, click on those links if you're not familiar with them. Joining DSA, DSA's Eco-Socialist Working Group, which is advancing these holistic campaigns to tackle all these problems, and in particular, this pledge to take action, Safe Schools action with DSA. Again, huge thanks to our audience, fantastic questions, and many thanks to the panelists. Your organizing is giving us hope and giving us life. So thank you very, very much.